The following program is brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.
Hello and welcome to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. The show attempts to deal with the questions that you've always wanted to ask Father, maybe at Coffee and Donuts, maybe at some other time, but you just don't have time to do it. And the priest who's going to be assisting us as he does every show is Father Stephen McKenna. Father, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Well, Father, today we are going to get into etiquette at Mass. In a broader sense, the last show we did etiquette towards priests. So we're staying in, you could say, etiquette country. But we have to talk, I guess, I don't want to use the word, but I can't think of an equivalent English or at least an American idiomatic phrase, pregame. Sort of, what do we do? What do we do before Mass? How do we prep for Mass? I guess we could call it pre-Mass. So I guess we should start with pre-Mass. What should we be doing on any day that we're going to Mass, either as we're dressing or as we're on our way to church? And how does that, how do we time that with when do you want us at church? When should we arrive? So let's start with that.
All right, very well. You know, the Mass is something that for us as Catholics is the most important thing that we can do in a day. When we think about it, it's truly Christ coming down upon the altar. It's Calvary all over again. It's literally our salvation there before us and our Creator there before us. And so going into it, just like anything that's important in our lives, we can't just jump into it without any kind of thought or prayer or preparation whatsoever. I oftentimes think of, in terms of either sports or business, like you said, pregame, it's kind of a good analogy, actually, because I would never, when I was playing sports, I would never go into, say, a baseball game without warming up and getting ready for it and mentally preparing. And I wouldn't go into a business meeting where I was doing a presentation without going over my notes and doing preparation for that. Same thing with Mass. It's infinitely more important than that, and we should prepare ourselves spiritually and mentally for Mass. We should get there early and do some preparation prayers, either devotions that we have, uniting ourselves with the sacrifice of the Mass. We should get there and read over the actual propers of the Mass. What I mean by propers is the introit, the collects, the epistle and gospel, and all the rest of the prayers proper for that day for the Mass, and basically get ourselves united with the spirit of the feast of that day and the Mass that we're about to hear, and also to have that calming effect of our soul to be able to better participate at the Mass in that regard.
It's interesting, Father, how hard it is, to get away from that. We may not necessarily live in New York or have a very hectic life, but it takes some time when you sit down, you genuinely feel like you kneel, and I feel like sometimes it just takes some time just to wipe out and be there, even if you are praying the rosary or you're trying to get yourself in the mood, or not in the mood, it's a bad phrase, but in the right space. On your way, even then, when you get in there, you got to shed the world. It's a challenge, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Our whole lives are wrapped up in everything in the world that goes on around us, and we can't just turn it off like a light switch. I one time saw at an office space that I was managing when I was working before seminary, And it was assigned to their meeting room, and it was kind of cheesy, but it in a way it works for the show today to get that mind frame. It said, check your attitude at the door. Well, for us, the whole world around us is contrary to moving us towards God, and the church is our oasis. The Mass actually literally happens in the sanctuary of the church, and we have to look at the church as our sanctuary, as our safe place from all the rest of the cares and the stresses of the world, all the little day-to-day worries or plannings or whatever it may be that go through our head, even simple things like getting dinner ready or whatever it may be. We have to leave those things behind, because those all have a proper place in our lives, but not there for Mass. We can leave our worries, as it were, at the door, or better yet, if we have real worries like sick family or special intentions, conversion of people, lay those worries at the feet of our Lord and say, I'm here to worship you, God. You take care of these things, and let my soul calm down so I can better be able to not only attend Mass prayerfully, but also to gain as many fruits and merits from it, because I'm more attentive and more focused on what is at hand and not all the other junk that's going on in my life or in my head or whatever it may be.
I guess, Father, I'm curious, and obviously as a cleric, your preparation for Mass is different. But let's do a little fantasizing here, because this doesn't happen for you. So let's pretend for a minute you don't have to be your own driver, that you don't have to hear confessions right before you have to Mass, that sometimes you don't have anyone assisting you for vesting, that you have your vestments laid out for you. So let's assume best case scenario, like when we were at the seminary together in November, and even then you had to practice as part of because you were the deacon, or you were one of the deacons or the subdeacons for the order, so you had to practice. So in an ideal world, let's say you're at the seminary and you don't have any of your regular parish duties, what's your preparation for Mass like? Tell us a little bit about how you get ready. And obviously it's a whole different thing getting ready to celebrate Mass, but maybe we can get some insight to make our preparation better.
All right. Very well. Well, oftentimes my preparation for Mass will include several things. One is I often try to tie in, if I have a morning Mass, I usually try to tie in my morning meditation before Mass, because I think that for me anyways, that gets me my thoughts all focused on the spiritual life and gives me that, like I said, that calming and that peace of soul, and also that focus on the things of God in that regard. I then will follow it up by actually reading the Mass texts themselves, like I had said as a recommendation for people, is reading the Mass for that day, the prayers for that Mass and the readings for that Mass ahead of time. That way I'm not trying to translate as I'm reading or trying to get a sense of the feast. I already have that in my mind. I've already united my soul in that way. And then for me also that reading it's not the first time seeing the text. It's something that I've read over already. And then there's prayers, there's preparation prayers for priests that are in the back of the Missal or on cards in the sacristy, or in our breviary that are there, the different psalms and prayers of the church that the church recommends for us to say. So all of those things are our preparation for leading up to Mass. And if I have a little extra time before Mass, say it's a little later, then perhaps I'll pray the breviary, especially Matins, where it has lessons regarding the feast, especially the second nocturne for Lives of the Saints and things like that. So oftentimes those are what go into my Mass preparation. It's kind of it takes a bit of time, but it's ideally that's leaving everything behind and really focusing myself on the task at hand, which is offering the sacrifice of Mass. And so for me, that's what I do. And while some of those things certainly don't apply to the people, I think in general that spirit, like you said, Stephen, would, that idea of meditating on things of God, laying your worries there, reading the Mass text, uniting yourself with the feast or the Sunday, whatever it may be, and reading. Oftentimes, a hand missal will have even little commentary on the feast or the Sunday, and commentary on the readings that you can also read and prepare yourself for.
I think one of the things that you get to do as a priest that is a real preparation, obviously, is your vestition prayers, because each of those not only is reaffirming your vocation, but really is getting you ready. And that's something I personally can recommend. I read those prayers myself. Obviously, I'm not vesting, but I feel like for me, those prayers are very fruitful.
Oh, very much, because they oftentimes, I mean, the virtues obviously are applying to the priest's life, but a lot of times things like, purity and chastity, or guarding ourselves against against evil thoughts, like the prayer for putting on the amice, and all of those things, those prayers have an overlap and a carryover to the faithful. And I think you're right. That is another great thing. And in a way, you're uniting yourself, because that's another important point to make, is that Mass is not just the priest saying Mass. It's not the priest's Mass alone. It's all of our Mass. If you're there assisting at a Mass, you are truly assisting. That is your sacrifice as well as the priest. And so by any way you can unite yourself to that sacrifice and to the prayers of the priest are always very fruitful in that regard.
Right. So Father's saying that it actually means something when he turns around and says Orate Fratres.
Exactly.
Now, Father, I think that part of what we're obviously we can use scripture verses. You said the propers of the Mass. I think that that's good and commendable. For people who want more than that, I suppose we by default have to mention the liturgical year by Dom Guéranger.
Oh, for sure. That's always wonderful. I mean, oftentimes he is commenting on like the second nocturne lessons, for instance. He often lists those lessons there, and also has commentary on it. And then, then in regards to either the feast day itself, he expounds upon it, or when we come into different seasons, you want to read something beautiful about the season of Advent, for instance. He has a huge section on just what Advent is and the history of it, and the spirit of that season. All these things from Dom Guéranger are so wonderful and so fruitful that it's a beautiful source of not only Mass preparation, but just even daily reading in regards to the faithful, because that is something that even if you can't make it to Mass, say on a random Wednesday, you can still be one in mind with the liturgical year of the Church, and also uniting yourself, at least spiritually, with the Masses that priests are saying that day.
I have to warn people, though, Dom Guéranger, being a Benedictine, he likes to throw that guilt in there. He'll say, the Easterns have never given up this type of fasting. Sort of a little little reminder to the Romans, the Western, say, hey, nothing's going to stop you from doing a little extra fasting and penance also. I notice he does that all no matter what season I'm in. Dom Guéranger is saying, the Easterns are always, they've always done such and such, and you think he's using that as an excuse to tell you that, hey, you people need to do it also. So I think that's also appreciated from Dom Guéranger, never letting us off the hook.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no such thing as a free lunch in that regard.
So before we enter into Mass proper, Father, so I think you've taken us to the beginning of Mass, so we're not quite at the prayers of the foot. Can you tell us in our regular catechetical format, when obviously people want to, who are new to the Church, or as a good refresher for those of us who do normally attend church on time, and when we say on time, meaning we get there before Father's coming out with his beretta on, what are the rules as far as, what constitutes attending Mass, and what and within the Mass itself, listening to a sermon, how does that relate to our duty in attending Mass.
Yeah.
So before we get into what we're doing in Mass, what constitutes an acceptable, I guess, minimum standard?
Well, not that we should ever be minimalists, but I think that's a very important question to deal with. And in that regard, first off, making the difference between a daily Mass and a Sunday Mass. Your average daily Mass is obviously not one of obligation. Not that we should habitually treat it differently, but it's also understood that if you're rushing from work to get to a daily Mass out of devotion, that's laudable, and no matter when you show up, you're doing something that is good. And if you're in a state of grace, then by all means, even if you show up late to the Mass, then you come to communion if you would desire to. That being said, Masses of obligation, that is holy days or Sundays, there is a certain requirement on the faithful to attend. The first part of that is that you're required to attend an entire Mass. So from beginning to end, you're supposed to be there for that day, and then within that, there's the core of the Mass that, for the bare minimum of not committing a mortal sin, of fulfilling your obligation for that Sunday or holy day, there is parts that you have to be there for. If you have to be at a Mass from before the offertory starts, which is either after the creed or after the gospel, depending on if there's a creed or not. You have to be there from before the priest offers up the host till after his communion. That's just the bare minimum of succeeding in not committing a mortal sin, not missing your Sunday Mass. So if you miss that, you've missed Sunday Mass, and you got to do it all over again. And it's important to also note on that idea of being there and leaving. There's, especially in the modern world today, there's this terrible thing going around where people will get up and leave in the middle of Mass. They'll go to the restroom or whatever it may be. First off, unless you have serious, medical issue going on, there's no reason to use the bathroom at all during Mass. You can go before or after. We were joking last night when I was talking to some of the priests here at St. Gertrude's about that whole idea, and Father Chicata said, for instance, that he had no idea that his church even had a bathroom until he was in the seminary and he was working a job as the janitor and had to clean it. He had no idea where it was even located. And I think that's the more the spirit that we need to take. The bathroom is there for if you need it before or after, but not during. It's not time to take a break or go there. And if you miss one of the three principal parts of the Mass, and those parts are the actual offertory itself, the consecration, and the communion of the priest, then if you miss one of those three principal parts, then you have not fulfilled your obligation. And so if you skip out to the bathroom and you miss the offertory, or you miss the consecration or something like that, then you better attend the next Mass if your church has one. Otherwise, you've committed a mortal sin. And so it's really, really important. And that, I think, a lot of times starts with parents. And parents need to train their kids that they go to the bathroom beforehand, and they need to tell them no when they ask to go during the middle of Mass. And that has to be, the way it goes. There was one time, it's quite amusing actually, that I had heard a story from a parishioner who had said that he was at Mass as a real young child, and he had gone to the bathroom and missed one of the three principal parts, and his father recognized that he missed that and sent him with the priest in the car for his missionary Mass in order that he would fulfill that obligation. And so he had to travel with the priest in order to succeed in fulfilling his obligation for the Sunday. So that cognizance of that and that mentality of how serious that showing up for that Mass is, but for those three principal parts, has to be in the foremost of our minds. Well, it should be just second nature, but it really, if it's something that you haven't recognized before, or you struggle with it with your children or whatever it may be, start making it a top priority in that regard. And then outside of mortal sin.
I was going to say maybe they're not going to the bathroom. They're taking a smoke break, Father. But I figured that would probably actually be worse.
Yeah, that'd be even worse. If you can't not smoke for an hour, we have some serious issues to work out here. And or any kind of break. I've even seen before, and it was really sad, is kids left the Mass and were eating the donuts, sneaking in and eating the donuts. They had told their parents that they had gone to, this is a different chapel altogether. It wasn't haunted here, but they told their parents they were going to the bathroom and gone in and were starting eating donuts. And you have to tell them, get back to Mass. You're missing Mass. And so it has to be, it has to be so important for the whole entire family going to a Mass that those things are absolutely necessary. Outside of the mortal sin area of it is, that obligation is for an entire Mass. So if you show up late, then, and you miss, say, all the way through the epistle, you haven't committed a mortal sin, but and once again, these things are if you've done it out of your own fault. So if you're just being lazy, or you're just making excuses for yourself, and you know that you could have gotten there earlier, then this is where it applies. If you are driving to church and your tire explodes and you have to change your flat, and that causes you to be late, obviously there's no sin in that. That's a matter of that's just life happening, and we understand that. But there's an area of venial sin in there too, because if you willfully show up late to the Mass and you miss part of it, that is not part of that core necessary part of the Mass, if you will, the three principal parts, then you've at least committed a venial sin at that time, because you have to, once again, hear an entire Mass. That's the obligation due to Sundays and holy days.
Well, and I guess the last thing we need to talk about outside of Mass, Father, because the sermon doesn't properly belong to the Mass, it's outside of the Mass. Assuming someone doesn't want to take a sermon break, what should we be thinking about in terms of the sermon?
All right. Well, sermon in that regard, like you said, is not properly so-called part of the Mass, but at the same time is truly important. One thing you need to realize is that everybody has a duty to receive religious instruction in their life. They're to learn about the faith, to learn the things that they need to know, and for oftentimes, which is in a way it's a sad situation, but and also it's part of the fact that people have lives and they're busy. Oftentimes for people, that's the sermon is the only time they're receiving religious instruction, and to just skip out on a sermon because you don't want to be part of it, either to take a break in the middle of Mass, or if you're at a place where there's multiple priests, like say here at St. Gertrude's, and sometimes they might preach before the Mass happens, and you just show up late because you assume the sermon's going to take place beforehand. That's truly an impious idea. That's not at all in following along with the mind of what the church is there to do, where the priest provides a sermon for the sake of, he doesn't preach a sermon for himself. He preaches it for everybody to hear. And when if you're skipping out on the sermon, first off, chances are that you're not studying your faith every single day, so you're missing out on the requirements of receiving religious instruction. And two, you're providing a distraction and a scandal to others that are there. You're providing a very bad example, and if you're a parent of children, you're providing bad example to your and bad habits to your kid, which is part of your state in life. And that way, through those things, it can be a sinful act in that regard as well. But it's part of the whole thing. It's not, we don't show up to Sunday Mass simply because we have to. We show up to Sunday Mass because we want to gain what we can out of it, which is graces from the sacrament itself, and then also the instruction that we need to apply to our faith and to our life every day.
I think those points are excellent, Father, and now you've gotten us right up to Mass, and I guess I said pre-Mass. Obviously, the preparation we're talking about can continue into right before Mass as you're kneeling or sitting as you're preparing. But now we get to is it a trick question or not, which is what is the best way to follow Mass? If let's say Mass has started, Father's come out from the bells rung, Father's coming out, Beretta on, and Mass is going to start. Is there such a thing as a best way to follow Mass?
Yes and no, I guess, if you will. Yes, there is a best way to follow Mass for your average day, everyday person. The best way to follow Mass, according to St. Pius X, is to follow along in their hand missal, to follow along with the actual prayers of the Mass itself, because that is something that, you can't be much more united to the Mass than actually to be praying the Mass along with the priest, and also in that way uniting yourself to that same sacrifice, if you will. With that in mind, it's we can say that it's not the only way, and it's not to say that by doing a different mode of following the Mass you're somehow doing something not worthwhile. Obviously, for some people they might not read quickly enough, and it's more of a distraction to follow in the Missal, or maybe their children, or whatever it may be. There's still many ways to assist in a Mass in that regard. But St. Pius X says for the average person attending Mass, the best way to do it is to read along in a hand Missal to follow the prayers of the Mass. Some other important ways to follow at Mass are, if you have young children, for instance, you can give them, there's either little children's missals which don't have all the prayers of the Mass, but give little spiritual comments on different parts of the Mass as they follow along, so they're following along with the parts and spiritually uniting themselves. Or some people will pray the rosary during Mass, and that's certainly something that's laudable. Or clergy, for instance, if they're attending a Mass, will either pray the Divine Office, or lay people sometimes will pray the Little Office of the Blessed Virgin Mary. People that are serving are obviously following the Mass. People singing in the choir are following Mass. And even if you just simply are prayerful and follow along with the movements and of the priest, and follow along closely and spiritually with what's going on, all of these things are ways to fruitfully attend Mass in that regard. A little comment on people who either are serving or singing in the choir. Sometimes for servers, for instance, if it's a big ceremony, they might be a little distracted with all the things that they have to do. Or for a choir, at any point, really, singing in the choir can be a little bit distracting. But in that way, don't feel like you're failing in some way because there are distractions going on. You try to prepare your choir book for the next hymn to be sung, or whatever it may be. You're not, those things are necessary in that regard. And actually, by doing those things, serving or singing in the choir, that's the closest that for a layperson, that's the closest that they can be to in that way of assisting at the Mass. It's that old adage, I believe it was from St. Augustine, if I'm not mistaken, that if you by singing, you pray twice. So, I mean, all of those things, when you're actually participating in the actual parts of the Mass by choir or serving, are also, of the utmost and highest of the fruits of the Mass as well. So, but I think also to take from that is the general principle. The general principle of attending Mass is to be there prayerfully, to be there not just bodily, but body and soul. We are composed of body and soul, so we should be there not just physically, but also in a prayerful spirit in that regard, to try to gain as much profit from every Mass we attend as possible.
So I've got two questions here, Father. One is,
okay,
what if remember we talked in the beginning about the world invading in our time. So we'd like to say that once we brush them off in our preparation for Mass, they'd be gone. But unfortunately, in real life, sometimes those can come right back in. And parents, we haven't forgotten about you. You've got your own special section. So don't think that the single man and father are forgetting about children. We will get there. Right now, we're going step by step. So how do you deal? How do you deal with those you're thinking about the office or something else pops into your mind. What are some good remedies to deal with that right away?
Okay. Well, first off, I think it's important to realize that one should never feel bad about distractions coming to them during Mass. In fact, it happens to even the most pious of saints during a Mass, that distractions will come into their mind and things will happen where they have to continually fight to draw themselves back. And even if that seems like all they're doing throughout that entire Mass is fighting to try to stay focused in some way, they should never feel like they've done wrong. That fight alone is extraordinarily pleasing to God. As long as He knows we're fighting against it in a prayerful way, we don't want to get angry at our distractions, because then we just make them worse. It's like pouring gas on a fire. But in that spirit of like flies, swatting them away gently and paying as little attention to them as possible, just trying to refocus back on the Mass. That's why the Missal is such a wonderful way to participate at Mass, for instance, because it forces you in some way to focus, because you're reading the prayers in that regard. My grandmother actually had a wonderful story about that. When I told her I was long ago, when I told her I was starting to go to the Latin Mass and all of that, she told me that about how much she had missed the Latin Mass, because she remembers when she was a girl, she had her St. Joseph's Missal, and she was always so focused on the Mass because she was reading out of her Missal. And then when the Novus Ordo came along and they didn't have to use a Missal anymore or anything like that, she said that she's looking at Susie's hair and she's looking out the window at the birds and so much more distracted. And so it's true, those little things like the Missal bring us back to focusing. Otherwise, even just focusing back on what the priest is doing or what's going on at the Mass, or looking at a statue of a saint and praying to that saint, and any way to just bring us back to a spiritual mode as best we can is constantly winning that battle. And oftentimes, because it requires sacrifice of us, it's very pleasing to God, even more so than if we were to be undistracted during a Mass, and because we actually had to fight for it. So.
Well, and Father, I wanted to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit today and ask, people assume that Father doesn't get distracted at Mass, and that's part of tying back to the sermon. I remember a priest telling me that he was looking out during his sermon and he felt like he was really connecting with someone, and he noticed, she at a moment where he thought, he was really connecting with her and she was getting what he was saying. He noticed that she raised up her rosary beads to make sure she was counting correctly. So he thought, oh, she wasn't listening to me. She was just really into her rosary. So obviously, tying back to what we were saying about there's no correct way to follow the Mass. That being said, when the sermon's going on, that's probably not a time to be saying the rosary, and that might distract Father as he's trying to make a point.
Well, it's true. I mean, while I would certainly rather someone there praying the rosary rather than getting up to take a smoke break or go to the bathroom, at the same time, once again, the sermon's there for you to hear. Now, if you're someone who shows up, out of devotion to like 2 masses on a Sunday, and you've already heard the sermon one time, then that's a wonderful thing to sit in your place to pray the rosary, especially pray it for the priest to preach well and that the people absorb what he's talking about and take it to heart. But for the average person who shows up to the one Sunday mass, try to focus on a sermon. But you did raise an interesting point. You said taking back that veil. Yes, priests too, fight against distraction. I think it's oftentimes a little easier for us because we're so focused often on what we're doing, but it's we too are humans, and we have to push thoughts away that come to us the same as anybody else. Like you said, that priest in that sermon thinking, "Oh, I'm really reaching so and so," and then realizing that she was praying a rosary. Well, that's a distraction thought right there that he has to push out of his mind and continue on with the sermon, and not let the fact that she's paying no attention to him get him down or distract him and throw him off track or anything. So,
well, and there, Father, I was addressing distractions from adults. Now I want to address distractions from people who have not yet reached the age of reason. And that's the screaming child who doesn't know that his or her ear-piercing shrieks are daggers into Father's brain that are forcing him to focus on trying to make sure he's delivering his sermon correctly. And that brings us, of course, to children's conduct, cry room, baby room, etc. So I guess why don't we start with, should we have a cry room? Did those exist before Vatican II? How is the expectation that parents are supposed to miss mass if their child is colicky or maybe can't stay quiet? How does the good of the many outweigh the good of the one?
All right. Well, very well. The first part of it is that parents need to realize that everybody's child, if it's their own, is the worst child in the entire church. That's a mindset that parents, I think, more often than not have, is that their child makes like a tiny noise, and all of a sudden they're the biggest distraction ever to come down the pike. And that's, take heart, parents. That's not true. And when we're offering the Mass, little noises that little babies make, oftentimes go unnoticed by us, or we're pretty good at pushing them out. That being said, if your child really does start to cry or to make a fuss or to make a lot of noise, then it is an act of charity towards those around us, towards those around you, I should say, that you take the child out to the foyer or to, if there's a designated crying room. And it is something that existed before Vatican II, for sure. It's if you go into most of the big churches, what you first walk into is at least a foyer, and which often had glass windows out into the church, so the mom could be behind glass, if you will, but still being able to see what was going on. And then later on, a little bit, still before Vatican II, some churches would even build a separate room that was, I guess, in a way more soundproofed, or install speakers in there, or whatever it may be, that would allow the parents to still, once again, know what was going on at the Mass, but to be able to take their child out and let them calm back down again, while not screaming into the lady's ear next to them. But with that in mind, is that idea of, first off, for the parents, if you do have to take your child out, first off, don't feel bad about it. It's just part of the territory of being a mom or a dad. But you should still try your best to do whatever you can to be spiritually united to the Mass. So, if you're able to, for instance, to kneel, then great. If you're able to still listen to what's going on, or still have a view towards the altar and focus as much as you can on that, then wonderful. If your child is really so upset and it seems like all you're trying to do is to calm them down, and you really not feeling like you're focused at all, then you still don't lose heart in that regard either. It's you haven't done anything wrong. You still have attended Mass, and sometimes the only prayer that the mother or father who takes the child out gets to offer up is simply offering up his or her own sacrifice and suffering to God in a way that is there. And sometimes those days certainly happen, and it's all part of the part of their state in life. It's all part of their vocation. Babies cry. That's just what happens, and you can't plan it all the time. And so you just do the best you can with it. So it's that recognition that that you are doing something charitable for those, especially the people attending Mass in church. If the baby really gets upset and taking them out, oftentimes it's best if parents sit towards the back so they're not walking past 15 people trying to get out. But you're certainly just doing what you have to do as a parent, and that's fine. With that in mind, the other side of it is, don't just plant yourself out in the crying room. If the baby calms down and is quiet again, you don't stay out in the crying room. Come back in. It's fine. That's why we say, sit towards the back. You'll be just fine, and you won't provide any distraction. And if the baby starts crying again, then get up and quietly and walk out and take care of it again. It's all part of that, how it works. Now, we say during Mass, it's like I said, if the baby starts crying, and it's really becoming a distraction, take them out. Even more so for the sermon, I would say, though. If you can get away with staying in there for a little bit with the baby crying during Mass, people are usually focused on their prayers or what's going on in Mass, and a little bit of noise is not much to distract people during Mass. But if the baby really starts to get going at all during a sermon, that's really important that you walk up, because then the priest's focus is no longer on just offering the sacrifice of the Mass, which you can push out, and people's focus is not on what's going on there. It's actually instruction coming out towards the people. Instead of being directed towards God, it's now directed towards the people, and they have to be able to pay attention and focus on a sermon. And so, if there's kind of more borderline situation when it comes to a sermon, err on the side of going out in that regard, because it's more difficult for a priest to overcome a crying baby, and then it does nobody any good if they can't hear the words coming out of the priest's mouth, because all they hear is little baby of God, crying and screaming in the back. So I think it's more diligence to go out into the cry room, especially during this sermon for that. So.
I guess this was particularly on my mind, Father, this last Sunday, and most of the congregation at the Mass I attend don't speak English, so I'm not outing anybody on our English speaking show by saying that there were some particularly loud children at Candlemas this last Sunday, and it was a real struggle for me as well, because I'm trying to focus, and so I know if it was a struggle for me, it was a struggle for at least one or two other people. So at what point does a mother or father, you could say, call it and say, all right, this child is a particular challenge. I'm going to have, maybe I alternate with a spouse, or I'm not going to go to Mass. I'm maybe going to watch the St. Gertrude's Mass cam so I can still attend Mass in a spiritual way. Obviously, it doesn't fulfill the obligation in a normal sense, but are you dispensed from your obligation if you have a child that simply will create a real ruckus in church? Where do you draw that line?
Well, I think it's important that I think generally speaking that a parent going to Mass is really a must, in that regard. It's, even if that means that they spend the entire Mass out in the cry room, that's better than staying home. And I think people also have a level of understanding that, sometimes children get fussy, and there's no way to really predict that or to plan on that, because training a child to be able to attend Mass actually can happen at a very early age if the parents are diligent about it to keep them, somewhat quiet and things like that. So that's why also it's important that a parent goes back into the Mass if the child quiets down, because it allows them to actually be in Mass and to realize that, no, I have to, even though they're very young, to be able to attend that Mass. So that I think that's really quite important. If you have a place that has multiple Masses and you have an infant child and that is oftentimes very fussy, then yeah, maybe it's possible to alternate, and that's okay too. But generally speaking, I think mothers shouldn't feel like they have to miss Mass because their child tends to cry a bit or anything like that. Now, that being said, there are times when a mother would be dispensed from that obligation legitimately, especially, for instance, if they are actually still recovering from having given birth to the child, or if the child is in some way sick. So if the child has an ear infection and that they're just really not doing very well health-wise, and they're going to be crying the entire time because of an ear infection or something like that, then that's a totally different situation, and they can stay home and still keep the Sunday holy, and like you said, go on the Mass cam or whatever it may be. And I think, and also, I guess in the winter that we're having here in the United States, it's something to point out that if it's legitimately, really, really cold, where a child could get sick just from being taken outside because they're like an infant or something like that, then I think that's also something that needs to be taken into account. But just because it's around freezing doesn't mean that you don't go to Mass. But if it's something where we've been having, in some of the places like Milwaukee, for instance, you might have a day where it's minus 20. Obviously, that's a whole different camp to be in for cold, and you have to make sure that your child stays safe in that regard. So I think those but I think the general rule is that even though it might be a struggle for the mother or father, and it might be you might feel like everybody's always distracted, I think the general rule of thumb is to still show up, because it's good for you, it's good for the child, and oftentimes in a mother or father's head that the quote unquote problem or situation is much bigger than it actually is. It might be a momentary distraction for somebody at the church, but overall, as long as you care to take the child out into the cry room or the foyer or whatever it may be, then generally speaking, it's really not as big of a deal as you think it is to everybody else there.
It's so funny, Father, when you said that I, having never been a parent, I've never had that thought that, my child is the worst. But it reminds me of, those times when you were younger and your parent would do something that you as an enlightened teenager thought was just so gauche. And you're like, oh, my parent's the most ignorant parent ever. The sort of the reversal of that. For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. The voice you were just hearing and the laugh that you were just hearing was from Father Stephen McKenna. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we are discussing the Mass, specifically the etiquette and the comportment that one should have not only during, but before and after. As a reminder, Pastoralia is a production of the Restoration Radio Network. All rights are reserved. Any duplication without explicit written permission is forbidden. Permission, however, can usually be very easily obtained by writing to us at mail@truerestoration.org. Father, I talked about the people who have reached the age of reason. Now I want to talk, hadn't reached the age of reason. Now I want to talk about the people who have reached the age of reason but are not yet parents. So I'm speaking about our younger children or adolescents, maybe between 7 and 15, because hopefully by the time you're reaching your teenage years, there's a little bit more common sense driving your actions, and it doesn't need to be dictated by your parents. One of the things that I really was edified by seeing the other day at Mass was an older woman at our chapel had a little children's hand missal. Of course, what is she going to do with a little hand missal? She's, 80 something. Well, she sees this little kid fiddling around, and this is something that the French would do. She comes over, because it's sort of like it takes a village. The French have no problem coming up and correcting your child if it needs to be. So it comes up, and hands this little hand missal to the kid, and then like sort of touches his cheek and says, here, do this. And to be fair, the kid kind of quieted down after a while. So I think that kid might have still been a little younger than 7. But what's acceptable? There are things I've seen them in trad chapels. I'm a little horrified whenever I do, but I see sometimes Cheerios. I see other things that are used to pacify children, and I'm worried that it makes it seem as though they're simply going to an event at which they're expected to behave, and so you're using devices that you would use, like if we were going to a classical music concert, or if we were going to some lecture and you had to bring your children with you, you'd bring these little accoutrements to help them, be quiet. But I feel that there has to be some sort of line in the sand, like there's no bringing Cheerios, to mass, or am I being a rigorist, Father? Because, I've been called many things. My latest new proud title is Neo-Ultramontanist. I'm very happy to be called a Neo-Ultramontanist. But if I'm a rigorist here, Father, correct me. But is it out of order to be bringing food to mass?
Well, first off, it's very clear that you're definitely in France if you're being called a neo-ultramontanist. So that's incredible. But no, I really don't. I think you're being too rigorous in that. Certainly things like that little prayer book or little religious picture book. I mean, there's all sorts of things, especially now, that are there for parents to use to kind of keep their children occupied, but in a somewhat spiritual sense. Now, if it's truly a baby and you give them pacifier or some noiseless little doll or something like that, then that's one thing. If it's truly an infant that we're dealing with, but as soon as a child is able to do even the little bit of somewhat understanding, and I think parents also need to realize that happens earlier than they give them credit for. They'll when they're, and to put it into perspective, parents will correct their kids for doing something wrong at home because they understand that they understand little things, but they don't think to give them religious things when they're at church because they think that they're too young. So you have to realize that even though your child might only be 1 year old, they're still able to, 1 or 2 years old, they still are able to at least take in pictures of holy things, or, keep themselves occupied by little picture, Catholic picture books or whatever it may be, rather than just trying to shove food and down their throat and put shiny objects like a cell phone or keys or something in front of their face or whatever it may be. No, we should be realizing that there should be a training going on, even from a very early age, of that child, just so that they can build up that good habit of separating what goes on in church and what goes on in the rest of the world. Like you said, it's one thing if you went to a symphony and you gave them Cheerios, nobody's going to take offense to that. But at the same time, the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass does not seem to be the place to be opening up the bag of goodies for the child just to keep them quiet. Quiet is not the only objective of that. It's also a training towards Mass and also a building up of them in regards to understanding parts of the spiritual world in their lives, even if it be small things. And like I said before, we always have that cry room or that foyer in most places that they can go to if they have to. And I think it's without delving in too deep as to how each individual parent handles each situation or each child, I think it's important that they realize once the child is starting to grasp a little bit of what's going on around them, if they have to go out to the cry room, it shouldn't be just simply, oh, I got to go out to the cry room. It should be go out to the cry room and make it a point of correction for them that we're not supposed to be out here. You're bigger now. You should be able to stay quiet in Mass. That's where Jesus is. That's where God is, and we need to be respectful and prayerful in that way. And I think parents can use their best judgment as to what level of correction is appropriate. But at the same time, as they're getting a little bit older, then it should be one of correction to go out there. This is not where we're supposed to be. So no, I'm with you. Maybe I'm a neo-ultramontanist, but I don't believe so. I think it's balance. I think.
Well, come on in, Father. There's plenty of room.
Excellent. Well, it's. I think it's important that they start young, and I think even in those early years, by building up those good habits and the good spiritual foundation, it's going to carry over into their later years, and it's not going to be as big of a fight when they're 10 to get them to pay attention at Mass if they've been doing so since they were 2. So.
Now, Father, we talked about the best ways for an adult to follow Mass. We talked about the Missal. We talked about prayer. We talked about the rosary. Have you found that there's a sort of best practice for that transition? Let's say I'm 8 to 14. I don't have behavior problems anymore. I don't need Cheerios. I'm not crying. What is the best way for them to follow Mass? We mentioned the children's Missal. Can they be entrusted to say the rosary? What's something that works?
Oh, for sure. I think anything, children's Missal, rosary, or even just following along if need be. But if you're above the age of reason, you're really starting to get into an area where you can do more and more. For instance, oftentimes for us, that's for boys. That is the point where they can start serving. They can, if they've received First Holy Communion, then they can start, and they've been studying their Latin responses, they can start serving Mass at that point. So if you can serve Mass at 7, you can certainly focus during Mass. You can certainly pray prayers. You can have prayer books, child's missals, rosaries, whatever it may be. Those things can all follow. Even in our school choir here, the kids start singing in the choir not much after 7, so it's all of those things, and then it comes back once again to that formation. If it's you're 7 years old and now all of a sudden I'm trying to get you to start being prayerful at Mass, then you're in for a real fight. But if you've been doing it since they were 1 or 2 years old to get them to be quiet and prayerful at Mass, and I think it's just the next step along the way of in their spiritual training. It's not as big of a deal. So it's for parents realizing that that's why, in addition to many other reasons, that's why that training early in their lives is so important, because they can do I think in a spiritual sense that the children are able to do more than adults oftentimes give them credit for, and if you give them an inch to be able to wiggle out of doing the things they can do, then they're going to take it, so we have to just be very diligent in that. Still there,
Father,
Stephen?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, Father. I was saying, are you saying that kids take advantage of situations?
Well, I didn't as a child, but I'm sure other children have.
I don't remember what age I was when I tried the old, Dad said no, let me ask Mom, and I have to commend my parents, even though I was the oldest, so I was their first child. They've already coordinated long ahead of time that wasn't going to work with them. That there was a solid front. So I appreciate it. My parents didn't let me really get away with that. So
yeah, parents oftentimes have the upper hand because, and they need to realize that, and maybe kids need to realize that a little bit too. Kids oftentimes think that their parents are as dumb as they are, but but the tricks that the kids pull are usually not anything new. It's usually something that the parents have already done themselves anyway. So just look for the things that you did as a child, and I'm sure they'll be coming out of your child's mouth sooner rather than later.
Fair enough. So speaking of wriggling out of things, so I want to make sure we're clear. I want to get into the legitimate reasons for missing Mass. But to clarify, the exceptions you noted specifically before we got in was mothers who are recovering from childbirth, if there is a sick child, or there is a weather issue. The roads are closed. It's so cold, you can't get there. And I have to say, this doesn't exempt Father. Father's got to drive through a blizzard to get to you. So maybe you might want to think about obviously keep in mind being safe. But, if the Postal Service can get through wind, sleet, and snow, there's no reason that you can't. That's just my rigorous ultramontanist, neo-Pelagian self-talking there, Father. But what are some legitimate reasons for missing Mass?
All right. Well, I think I'll just kind of expand on that weather issue a bit. People, especially with the winter time, often tend to be rather lenient. Not everybody, obviously, but some people tend to be rather lenient as to, well, it's snowing or weather's inclement, that I just, God understands I won't show up to Mass. Well, if it's legitimate that it's really, really bad weather and you can't make it there, then yes, God will understand that. He wants you to be safe. He doesn't want you to be reckless in any kind of way. But at the same time, we have to have a mindset that Mass should be the last thing on our list that we cancel for that day, rather than the first thing. If you cancel Mass and then you are going out to the store later on to do some grocery shopping, or you're going to see a movie, or or a restaurant, or you're going to a friend's house to watch a ball game or something like that, you probably erred in your judgment as to whether or not to show up to Mass that day. And it's, if you can get out to do other things, then you should have been able to make it to Mass. But once again, like I said, sometimes weather is really bad, and we understand that people can't do the impossible or the dangerous to get there. And so, use your own judgment. Don't cancel Mass because the forecast the day before told you it was going to be bad, and then you wake up and realize it's not really snowing all that hard, but you've already canceled Mass in your own mind, and so therefore it's done. It's we should try to make it as at all costs, and if it's impossible, then, or really dangerous or something, then that's a whole different situation. Another point that would be a legitimate excuse for not attending Mass is illness on the part of the person attending. So if you're sick, but legitimately sick, then yes, God doesn't need you to kill yourself to try to get to Mass. But I think we also need to realize, what does it mean to be sick? And when people ask me this, actually quite often, how do I know that I'm sick enough to not go to Mass? And so my general rule of thumb for people is if you would show up for work or for school, then you should show up for Mass. If you would skip work or school, then you're probably sick enough to skip Mass too. You don't have to be coming in and giving people some nasty flu because you wanted to be a superhero of virtue. But at the same time, I think that's a good rule of thumb, is that if would I go to other places? And if it's yes, then I should be at Mass. If it's no, then I wouldn't leave my bed for anything. Then stay home. That's fine, and do the best you can. So illness is one, and like you said, illness of children, not just infant children either, but if a child is sick that's, say, 10, they can't maybe stay home alone yet, but they're too sick to go, then obviously a parent has to stay with them. But if a parent stays home with the children, doesn't mean that the whole crew has to stay home either. Just because one child's sick doesn't mean mom, dad, and all his siblings have to stay home as well. It's, the sick one, and if someone needs to take care of him, one other person. So that covers, I think, illness. Another reason that would be a legitimate reason for missing Mass would be distance. If you live an extraordinary distance away from Mass, and it's a hardship to get to it. Now, let's probably clarify what a legitimate distance actually is. And it's funny, talking with Bishop Dolan last night and some of the other priests here, it was he brought up one that would really kind of put it in perspective to me. There's Father Bodden, who was actually of this area here. He was the first priest ordained in the United States, and he was right here in Bardstown, Kentucky, not too far from here. And his rule of thumb for people back then of not showing up for Mass was if they were beyond 5 miles for walking or 10 miles for horseback. So now think of what it takes and how much of a sacrifice it takes to walk 5 miles. That's quite a distance. That's more than most of us would walk in a day, unless you're going to the gym or something like that. And so 5 miles is quite a ways and takes quite a while to do. And so when you try to think of, okay, what about in our time? I don't walk to church, I drive to church. Well, I think a good safe bet is if you live over an hour away, then I would say then your obligation to get there is not there. That's not to say that if you can make it and you want to make it, then you shouldn't come. We should do all we can to get to Mass. But if you're over an hour away and it's really a hardship, or your money's tight or something like that, then and you can't make it every week, then that's understandable and fine, and certainly that would be something that you wouldn't be sinning by missing Mass in that type of situation.
Well, and I to put it in a modern and an ancient perspective, I was thinking as you were talking about that distance, that a lot of medieval cities, you can basically walk across them in 20 minutes. That was sort of the sustainable rule of thumb. In Toledo, outside of Madrid, I remember it adheres to that rule. You can walk from one side of Toledo to the other in about 20 minutes. So my thought is you probably have, if you put Father Bodden's rule in place, it'd be walking from one side of Toledo to another and another. So you'd be crossing it 3 times. That's quite a bit of distance. Or I was going to say 5 miles, that's an average day in Paris for those of us without a car. So, I mean, Sunday
Right.
shouldn't be any different. So illness, Father, distance, what else?
Another one would be financial hardship. It's not something that we're insensitive to, or something that we don't think that doesn't exist today, but it certainly does exist. Is some people are hard off financially, and sometimes they can't afford to drive to church or every day or every Sunday. It's sometimes they're living from day to day, just trying to put a meal on the table, and to spend $15-20 in gas would actually be a real hardship for them, and that's understandable. That's something that that certainly happens. What I do want to make a distinction of is a difference between not being able to buy gas and not being able to put money into the offertory basket. Say, you might be poor, and it might be just within your means to drive to the church and back again, and it doesn't really leave you much left over to make as an offertory. But don't let that stop you from coming, because that is something that is, that God would much rather you get to church than not to. So if you're able to make it, then come. But if you're not, because you're hard off financially, then maybe every other week is good for you, or maybe or whenever you can, or whatever it may be, or maybe it's truly not at all. But in those cases, certainly be in touch with your priest, because perhaps they can do something in regards to the sacraments and for you outside of that. So,
Right, and in the secular realm, Father, just on our part, I think I can speak for the ownership group here at True Restoration that if that's a challenge for you, feel free to send us an email, and we'll see if we can't maybe send you a gas card or two to get you to Mass a little sooner. We don't want people to miss out on Mass because of money. So if that's something we can help with, and we can't make a general pledge to the whole world, obviously, but if you're listening to this and that's something, send us an email to mail@truerestoration.org, and we'll see what we can do to help.
Right. And talk with your priest as well. Sorry, Stephen, but talk with your priest as well, because oftentimes, I mean, most traditional chapels don't have much in the way of surplus, but I know most chapels do have like a St. Anthony's box or something where it's people actually will give donations to the poor, or maybe the priest does have a little bit of money to be able to help out in that situation, or maybe somebody in the parish does that the priest knows of. Talk with your priest as well, because they might be able to help in some way, or even if it's something as simple as maybe someone lives in the area near you and you can hop in the car with them, whatever it may be. So always talk with your priest in that regard, because sometimes there's solutions to those types of issues.
All right, Father. I know you've already addressed the weather issue, so I think the only thing to add on to that is something you mentioned, which is, make sure that church is the last thing canceled, not the first thing canceled, right? You're like, oh, it snowed out. I guess that means we're sleeping in, but we're going over to, Aunt Susie's for a barbecue afterwards. Well, I don't really know if that's going to work, apart from the fact that a barbecue might be hard to do in the snow. But
right.
So apart from weather, what happens when the weather's really good? Like, let's say it's a vacation, Father. What about that?
All right, you're touching on possibly one of the grandest of misunderstandings for dispensation from Mass. People oftentimes think that traveling in and of itself will give them a dispensation automatically from attending Mass, and that's so far from the truth. You don't get to vacation from God. That's God doesn't take a week off. You don't get to take a week off from Him. So it's that should really not be our thoughts at all. Now, if, for instance, your vacation takes you somewhere that is not near Mass, then that's a different situation altogether. So, say if you had family up in the northern territories of Canada or something, and you were going up to visit them for a week and a half, and there's no Mass around, well, then obviously now it's impossible, and you cannot get there. So that's now that would be a dispensation in that regard to not show up for Mass. But if you were to take a vacation and you were to come and visit Cincinnati, Ohio, and that St. Gertrude's is down the street from you, then you're not, just because you're on vacation does not mean that you don't have to show up to church, because when there's Mass readily available for you. And also with that, I think it's a good point to make in regards to any type of situation where it's a legitimate excuse for missing Mass, is that all you're excused from is the actual attendance of Mass. You're not excused from the commandment of God Himself. You're not excused from the of keeping His day holy. And so, if you can't make it to Mass, then you need to make sure that you're at least saying your prayers, and you're at least making sure you're saying your rosary, and try to say your Mass prayers along as well. And if you're able to get to the internet, maybe attend Mass on the Mass cam or whatever it may be, the best you can do to keep that day holy. Avoid all unnecessary servile work and unnecessary shopping and things like that. So it's just because you're in a place that you can't get to Mass doesn't mean that you just, Sunday just becomes another day, and it's a freebie day for me to do whatever the heck I want to. And that's not the case. You're just in a situation where it's impossible to get to the actual sacrifice of the Mass, but you still keep our Lord's Day holy and unite ourselves as closely as possible.
And I think that kind of also goes into one other area that, because it's a combination of the two, that people need to realize is that, entertainment should not be your reason for missing Mass. That's not a legitimate reason. So you live in a place and there's a Mass at 10 o'clock in the morning every Sunday, but this weekend someone had an extra ticket to a football game or something. Doesn't mean you can just skip Mass because you want to go to the football game, and the times don't line up right for you. That's not a justifying reason. You have to put God before anything else, and that means going to a game, or just because you have morning tea time does not mean that God understands golf is that important. So it's don't excuse yourself just because something fun is happening that you want to be part of.
Father, can I go a little deeper with the vacation question? Again,
sure.
I think you addressed some important points. And for those who are traveling, if you don't know, on sgg.org, there's a list of parishes that you can attend that are non-unicum masses, and masses in which a heretic is not named as the head of the Catholic Church. And obviously at cmri.org, they also have a list of non-unicum masses. So, Father, can I say, obviously I don't want to talk about sins because I'm not a cleric, but can we say that there is at least, well, I'll let you say it. How about that? Is there an obligation in doing vacation planning to take a look at that list and maybe, I don't want to say, incorporate, ask Father for input into the family vacation in that sense?
I think it's more of a common sense type of point, of making sure in your life that you're trying to put God first as much as you can in all things, and making, like I said before at the beginning of the show, Mass not something that we just have to do and look for any excuse to get out of it, but actually something that we want to do, make it part of our lives, realize that we're going not just to be, for some rule that I'm just trying to check off my box. I showed up to Mass, I cooked a dinner, I packed my bag. It's not just a list and a list of many things to do in a day. It's something that we should try to plan around, try to make sure that that's the most important thing. Now, it can't be succeeded in all the time. You might really desire to go to Rome on a vacation because there's so many holy sites to see in such a beautiful place, and there's Mass offered there every other weekend in the city of Rome, and you happen to show up on that off weekend. Well, that's not impious. That was the only weekend you could go, and a week you could go, and that just happened to be that way. But if it's something where you're like, well, I could go to vacation in Tampa, Florida, or and go to one of the beaches near there, or I could go to vacation in the southern part of Texas and go to the beach there, one of which is close to the Mass, and at Tampa, for instance, near the seminary, and one of which is not close to the Mass. Well, then the choice should be obvious to anybody at that point. I should choose the one which is closer to the sacrament, so I can get there.
But I do think, Rome. I think the Institute of Our Lady of Good Counsel might have a Mass there quite regularly. But as I can comment today that I'm in maybe one of the most Catholic cities outside of Rome I've ever been to in my life. I'm in Prague, and back in the day, there was no shortage of churches. There were churches everywhere. You turn left, you go down the street, there's a church. You turn right, there's a church. There's statues. There are kings and saints watching you in every corner of this city. There may not have been electronic surveillance back in the day, Father, but there was definitely saintly surveillance. And I think that was probably a good thing. But I think as a layperson, it's important to consult with clergy and maybe ask them for a resource. I didn't know, even among the St. Gertrude's clergy, they did not know that there was a regular mass established in Paris before I got here. So sometimes information, even among the clergy, is not extremely well distributed. So, but sometimes a priest does know something you don't know. So you might think, Father, I couldn't find any masses there. He says, oh, I know Father so-and-so. He says mass there on such and such a date, and then maybe you can make your vacation work to when there's going to be a priest there, because I actually have to think that makes your vacation not only do you get to go see some beautiful things and do what vacation is supposed to do, which is supposed to get you away from work, recharge your batteries. In my case, I'm a church maniac. I love going to see Catholic churches. That's how I recharge my batteries. That you get to see those wonderful things, and you still get to go to mass. It's a luxury in our days because there's so few true masses anymore. But it can be done. I don't think it's impossible. I think it can be done.
Absolutely, I agree, and certainly you have a better chance of your priest knowing some mass that's offered in some place than just your everyday other layperson, because just the circles that we run in, I guess we might meet up with a independent priest one day, and he says, oh yeah, but I say a missionary mass every other week in such and such a city, and you didn't know about it, but you try to remember it just in case someone happens to be there. So oftentimes we have not a perfect knowledge of where mass is, but it's certainly an increased knowledge of where there are masses that you can attend to.
For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia, Episode 2 on the Restoration Radio Network. That was Father Stephen McKenna. I'm Stephen Heiner. Today we're discussing Mass, specifically comportment and etiquette at Mass. Fathers walked us through preparation before Mass. We called it pre-Mass. I guess it's pre-Massing. We talked about the best ways to follow Mass. We've talked about children, cry rooms. We've also been talking about reasons for missing Mass, and sports, or a Bengals game or a Packers game for those who live in Wisconsin, for which the Green Bay Packers are actually a religion. Those are not reasons. Those are not. I'm sorry, I offended all our Wisconsin listeners with just that statement there, Father. So now I want to talk about nuts and bolts, and part of that is ask Father, when is the proper time to kneel for the Sanctus? There's this old lady whose knee hits the ground the minute that bell rings. And then there's somebody else, they wait until the Sanctus is finished. And I don't know, and am I sinning? And I suppose let's start with that, Father. What are the rubrics for low Mass? And are we sinning when we're not kneeling as soon as that bell rings?
Well, no, you wouldn't be sinning, but you should follow, generally speaking, rubrics for attending Mass is kind of tricky because there are a lot of different customs at different places, and if you show up someplace, and for instance, if you show up and there's a strange custom that does not happen in most places, but it happens there, then you should just kind of follow along with what the people are doing, as long as it's not anything overtly impious. So, for instance, there was one chapel that I was at that during the low Mass they would sit during the epistle. And that's not something that's normal, but it's not something that's truly wrong. And so therefore you just kind of go with the flow on that and do what everybody else does. But generally speaking, just following what everybody else does. And if you're confused at all, look to the servers. If they're standing, you should probably be standing too. Or if they're kneeling, then that's probably a good position to assume if there's nobody else there to look at to see what they're doing. That's always an easy what do I do now type of situation.
Father, one situation where that immediately comes up that I just thought about as you said that, I thought at the Credo low Mass on a weekday when there's no sermon, as soon as you're done for the gospel, the priest then moves towards if there is a Credo that day, you see the altar servers go down. Some people, I think, remain standing because they feel they're supposed to be kneeling for the Incarnatus Est? Should they be kneeling or should they be standing?
Well, that's another one that's truly a custom. Here at St. Gertrude's, I believe the servers kneel, and but in other places I've been to, the servers will stand throughout the Credo and Genuflect with the priest at the Incarnatus.
Okay.
So it's one of those things that nobody really wrote a book on. This is how the Universal Church attends a low mass, and we have to realize too that part of the reason for that is pews and places to actually sit are, in the terms of 2,000 years of church, are relatively new to coming into the church. So a lot of times you were either standing or kneeling, and that was the beginning end of it. And so it was, so that whole pew idea is relatively new to church churches and that are part of the of Catholic liturgy. So there's no real true universal thing, but there are some that are universal practices. So, for instance, the gospel. No matter where you go, people should be standing for the gospel when it's read. That is something that should definitely be done. The canon of the Mass, so from the time the bells ring for the Sanctus, so when the priest finishes the preface, everybody should be getting themselves into the kneeling position. Now, it's not a race. You don't have to do, like you said, that lady that slams the ground at 100 miles an hour and creates a crater. You don't have to do that. But at the same time, especially if you don't wait till the end of the Sanctus to go. It's when the preface ends, you are now in the canon, and you. So when the bells start to ring, you start to kneel, and you should stay kneeling all the way through the canon, through after communion time, and the Blessed Sacrament is back in the tabernacle, or if there's no communion given and it's just the priest saying Mass until after he receives communion under both species, and then that should be absolutely a time of kneeling. Now, it's important, I think, just on a comment with this, is that part of that kneeling, standing, sitting rubrics, those are the three general rubrics for people attending Mass. Those are three distinct rubrics, and if you're not able to kneel, that's okay. If you're physically you have bad knees, or some sort of, you're elderly and unable to do so, whatever it may be, then that's okay. Just sit during those kneeling times, but don't do the half sit, half kneel idea where your butt is on the seat and your knees are kind of either dangling down or touching the kneeler in front of you lightly. Just pick one or the other, because in addition to it being really sloppy looking and slouchy looking to as a posture, it's a posture that's not very devout and it's not nice for our Lord. In addition to that, it can actually and has actually happened that people, by sitting kind of on the edge of that pew, can actually crack the pew. It certainly has happened, and we have to realize that pews are extraordinarily expensive, and the thing about pew is they're not easy to repair when you just break off a chunk of it either. So it's if you're sitting, you're sitting. If you're kneeling, you're kneeling. But do either one of them by itself, really. So that's just because you can't kneel doesn't mean you're being some sort of you're being undevout because you're unable to kneel fully by actually just regularly sitting. And people will feel that need to kind of do the half in between thing, but no, don't. Just if you can't kneel, just sit. That being said, if you can kneel and you're just being lazy, don't be lazy and kneel up straight. So I think it's important to kind of to grasp that, because it actually not only in just outside of the rubric and the proper posture for it, but it also has a practical application for care of church furniture. So it's and so just a kind of a little aside on that. And then
I was going to say, Father, if you're breaking church pews, we need to have a conversation about some other choices in your life also, right?
Well, it's true, but but at the same time, there are people who are bigger than other people, and that's okay. And also we have to realize that front section of the pew, it sounds weird, and nobody wants to be the guy that breaks the pew for sure, because then that's going to be horribly embarrassing on top of it all. But also that some pews are different, and they might not be all that. They might be old, or they might not all be that sturdy in that little front section, which is basically just kind of without support to it. And so it could certainly happen. And Bishop Dolan reminded me that in his experience that it has happened. So,
well, I know I've been seated in a chair when it's broken before, and I know how embarrassing that is. So I can't imagine what that would be like in church. So, and I think what you had said earlier, Father, I think it's important, because as trads, we're so used to being told, if we came over from the Novus Ordo, that we were wrong to kneel. And so, I think sometimes we do a lot of our actions with conviction. You're like, well, I'm going to kneel. I'm going to be the first person to stand for the gospel, because I need to show these other chumps, when they're supposed to stand. And I think part of that is we all have to, within ourselves, realize that, be patient with people. If they're new to the chapel, let them know what the custom. Maybe they're coming from a chapel where they didn't do that, or I've seen some chapels, they will not sit. So at some in some chapels, as a priest is getting ready to say the sermon, he will remove his maniple and sort of set the altar to be ready for when he comes back. And people start sitting as soon as Laus Tibi Christe is said. I know other parishes that will not sit until the priest is in the pulpit. They will not sit. Now, I don't think either practice is wrong, but I think if you see someone sitting down, don't bite their head off later. They may have come from a different parish, and just say, you ask them, you can ask them an innocent question. Say, what's your? I noticed that when we had the at the sermon, you sat down. Was that how it was at your last parish? That's a non-threatening question. It doesn't imply that they're wrong. It doesn't imply that you're right. It's simply an informational question, and hopefully you're not making them feel unwelcome. And if they do follow up, and if they're goodwill, just say, just that's our practice here. That's what we do. There's no sin involved. That's just our custom.
Yeah, exactly. So I think going from, go ahead. Sorry, Stephen.
No, that's all, Father.
I think going from Mass rubrics, I think it flows nicely into communion rubrics. Now, people are probably thinking to themselves, rubrics for communion, you go up and, as long as you get the whole kneeling part of it, the communion on the tongue part of it right, you're probably doing all right. And largely, yes, but I think there's a few points that, very briefly, I think need to be mentioned in regards to receiving communion. First and foremost, we talked about focus at Mass. Even more so, focus as you're going up to receive our Lord, body, blood, soul, and divinity, and Holy Communion. Don't be, do everything you can to keep yourself from being distracted. Don't be talking. Don't be looking around. Don't be, paying attention to Susie's hat, or to paying attention to, the fact that someone's shirt back has come untucked, in front of you, or whatever it may be. Focus on what you're about to do, receiving Christ in Holy Communion, and being as prayerful and recollected as possible. And when you're kneeling at the altar, at the altar rail, same thing goes. Don't be looking around all about you. Don't be watching other people receive communion. You should be focusing on what you're doing. You should, either be, if the priest is standing there, focus on receiving communion, and if he's down at the other end of the line for communions at the other end of the rail, then, either have yourself in a, kind of a downward eyes look to be recollected, or focus on a statue of a saint or the altar, or whatever it may be. But it should all be very prayerful and very quiet as you're walking up. Have your hands, together as you're praying, hands joined together as you walk to and from the communion rail. And being quiet also means not only don't talk, but also getting up and moving, something that is kind of like this. It's a strange thing. People are coming up for communion, and then that they're moving to allow people to walk. So it's not that they're doing something bad, but there's this all of a sudden there's this big cacophony of noise of all the kneelers slamming up or slamming down from going to or from communion, and it's just very disruptive. If you have to move the kneeler up so people can walk, do so very slowly and carefully so it doesn't make any noise, and there's no race to get up there. Just take the extra second, and so that air of holiness stays in the church as much as possible. And then when you get to the rail, I think this is where things really get kind of jumbled up. People get the kneeling part, and people get the sticking out their tongue part, and for the most part, unless they're newcomers, they understand they don't say amen. The priest says amen to the communion prayer for the traditional mass. But what most people don't get is actually how to receive communion. First off is the hands. If you're kneeling there, don't, just because you have your hands together in a prayerful way, don't keep them tucked up underneath your chin. When the priest comes there, the server's communion paten has to go underneath your chin. So if your hands are in the way, it doesn't allow the paten to get there, and and that paten needs to be there so we can protect against the host or any particle of the host falling at all. And
I remember as a server, I had to do the finger beat down, with the paten sometimes. Yeah. Just a light kind of tap, like I need you to move your hands down.
Yep. And nobody likes to do that. Nobody likes to do that. It's something that we got to do, but nobody likes being the one to disrupt, the pious lady who's deep in thought and prayer as she's about to receive our Lord, and just like smacking her in the hands with the communion paten. So to avoid all that, keep your hands down lower. If your church has a communion cloth, as is the appropriate custom, then put your hands under the cloth. That's where they're supposed to be, that underneath that communion cloth, and then if you have a small child that maybe their head just barely, they're of communion age, and their head just barely comes up above the altar rail, well, you have to teach them to keep their hands lower too, because even if they put their hands under the communion cloth, they're still going to be right underneath their chin, so they still got to keep their hands down low too.
Now, Father, with the communion cloth, I've been taught, please correct me if I'm wrong, I've been taught either to, if you're going to have a communion cloth, to place your hands palms up to form a flatter surface, so that if the host does fall, it's not falling onto a peaked surface where it could bounce off and onto the ground, or to just have your hands underneath the rail, so that, again, if the host falls, it's falling onto a flat surface.
I think the idea is more of because you actually want your hands under the cloth, so I think it's more of that creating a kind of a palms up flat surface underneath you, so you can actually pull it towards you. Because if you just put them under the rail, there could be a gap between you and the cloth. And so it'd be better to actually have your hands under the cloth and, like you said, palms up, so that it's more of a flat surface. But it actually, in a way, it kind of extends the cloth towards you, and in that way bridges the gap. It does what the cloth is there for. Oftentimes it's not really that much of a difference, because your head might be over the communion rail anyways. But sometimes depending on how it's configured, it might not be. So just whatever is easiest to do, and whatever seems most fitting in that regard with the cloth. With the actual receiving of communion, I think it's also important to talk about where people's head should be. People need to tilt their head back and actually tilt it backwards, and stick out their, open their mouth and stick out their tongue. We were talking about here, and it's funny. The number one offender for this is our young girls. And Bishop Dolan said, the one time you want them to open their mouth is when they don't do it. So, and it's true. For some reason, it's almost like they're cognizant of making a kind of a funny looking face by doing so, whatever it may be. But it's really difficult for a priest to try to, it's almost like trying to stick a coin in a slot almost, if you keep your head tilted forward and your mouth not really all that open, or your tongue not sticking out. It's difficult to get the host in there without any kind of danger to the host itself. And
I think you're really onto something with that, Father. That idea of looking stupid. People don't realize, but what they don't realize is if they don't do it, then they actually put us not only as altar servers, but priests see it far more often. I'm an old, grizzled, retired altar server now, so I don't have these situations. But you'd watch these million ways. People create a mailbox for our Lord, or they do this salamander thing where their tongue just sort of darts out and darts back in, and these are all. This is distracting, and you're thinking the altar boy is just I don't want to laugh, but they're making it more difficult. And then Father's got to figure out a way to deliver our Lord to you, because you're making it difficult. And it's one of these weird things. It's not anything you get taught. I think probably should be taught at First Communion. Maybe people weren't taught this, but yes, it may look a little odd, but you're making it easier. The priest has to go up and down the line, as you're saying, head back, tongue extended as far as possible, maybe your mouth open as well. Just, yes, if someone were to take a picture of you at that point, it probably wouldn't be your Facebook profile photo. But that's not important. You're there to receive our Lord. It's not about how you look at any age. And I think you're talking about something that's really practical and important.
Oh, very much so. And I think people also need to realize is that nobody is looking at them. That's the thing. Everybody else has to do the exact same thing. And, and your tongue looks, pretty much the same as everybody else's tongue. And people shouldn't be watching you anyway. So don't worry about what you look like, as long as you're receiving our Lord reverently and in a manner that is going to be safe for the sacred species. So it's, I think, for all those parents who are listening, it's really a good thing right now when you're hearing this to think, okay, maybe tonight I will go through with my children on how they should receive communion. It sounds silly, but it's something that as a priest I can say that it's almost like rolling, flipping a coin, whether or not someone's going to actually stick their tongue out. It happens that often that people mess this up in some way, and it just makes everybody's life a little more difficult, and also puts the host at more risk in that regard. So, so parents, take your time. Even if you think, okay, my daughter or my son is 15, I don't need to do that. That's okay. You know what? Because still do it with them too, because it's not just young kids that are getting it wrong. It's people of all ages, and so it's something to just go over real quickly with them, and so they all know this is the proper way to receive communion. This is how we receive our Lord, and so it's head tilted back, tongue out, and as still as possible. And when the priest puts the host on your tongue, don't leave it sticking out there for a long period of time. Once the host is securely on your tongue, take it back into your mouth. And then something that most people don't do, but is really the best practice, is to swallow your host there at the rail. Now, some older people might have difficulty with this because their mouths might be drier and might take them longer, and that's a whole different situation whatsoever. But if it's if you can swallow a host within a matter of a few seconds without really disrupting the flow of things, then do it at the rail, rather than receiving communion and then jumping up and racing back to your pew. Meanwhile, you still have our Lord in your mouth, and it's really just not respectful in that way, and it's not edifying for that. And then one last point in regards to communion is, parents, if your children are coming up with you to the rail and they're not going to receive communion, teach them to put either a finger or their hand over their mouth. You may think to you that it's obvious that they're not of First Holy Communion age, and you may think that, well, gee, I know Father really well, and so he should know that they're not of First Holy Communion age. But when you're going down a line of 120 people to give them communion, you don't think of who's of communion age and who's not. We have no idea sometimes, and sometimes kids are really close looking in age or whatever. Just teach all your kids to put their finger or their hand over their mouth. That way they know that they're not receiving Holy Communion. They're just simply accompanying their parent up to the rail. So I think that's important too.
I think, and just to bookend your conversation on receiving, Father, I think all of those actions just need to be done smoothly and genteelly. There isn't an urgency about it. I was thinking, as you were saying, the host is put on your tongue. Don't snap your mouth shut. Don't pull your tongue back in. Just slowly take your time and do it. And as you say, I think that's an excellent practice to swallow the host right there. And then you have our Lord for a few minutes, essentially to yourself, literally. To kind of take us into our next topic, Father, communion is the time when you get to see everybody. I think part of the challenge for those of us who go back from communion is it's sort of a licensed people watching time. Everyone's in front of you, and you're like, oh, I think I'll just watch everybody go to communion. And I've been guilty of this on more than one occasion. You just get caught people watching, and then before you know it, you've lost your time, your private time with our Lord that you just had. And for me personally, the best way to deal with this is usually to look down or to close my eyes, because otherwise I just get pulled into it. And you yourself, you are serving communion to everyone who's presenting themselves. You not only get to see everyone, that's part of what you're doing, but you also get to see how they're dressed. And that's the last thing that we want to address today, which is clothing for Mass. And we know that we're going to step on some toes. And for me personally, I'm happy to jump on those toes for you, Father. But let's get into that. What should we be thinking about as we're getting ready for Mass?
Okay. Well, I think it's important that we have this general recognition, not only clothing-wise, but all things that come with us going to Mass, that we're there to worship God and to serve God and to be there before Him. And so we should present ourselves in a way that is pleasing and respectful to God. I think that has to be the number one thing. But also with that is cutting out the extras. You don't need to show up to Mass with every single bracelet and ring that you have in your jewelry drawer, so you can jingle down the aisle and draw as much attention to yourself. You don't need the biggest of chandelier earrings to draw attention to yourself. You should look very proper as much as possible, but at the same time, not anything that's to take people's attention off of what's going on at Mass and draw them to yourself. So that's part of it. The other part is, before we get into the actual dress itself, is one common device that comes with people everywhere they go now, is that of a cell phone. And we're beyond the days really of pagers, I guess. So but not too many people have pagers anymore. But cell phones are now the new thing that are attached to everybody's hip and pocket, and they all make all sorts of noises. And oftentimes people don't even have the best choice of ringtones. And the last thing you want to hear is is Michael Jackson going off in the middle of your Mass because someone forgot to turn their phone off.
And
nobody
again,
needs to hear Man in the Mirror.
I was going to say, if Michael Jackson is your ringtone, we need to talk about your life choices anyway.
Exactly. But it's everybody going into church should turn their phone off. Just not on silent, not on vibrate, off. It should be off, because it should be something that you don't even think about in that time in church. Now, obviously, if you're a doctor or you're a police officer on call or a firefighter on call, or your grandmother is in the hospital or something like that, and you need to have a phone on, then that's a different situation if you legitimately need to be on call for something. But in those situations, then you should put it on vibrate. That way you're causing as little disturbance to those around you as possible. Because
I don't know if it's been your experience, Father, but I've always found that the people whose cell phones go off are there's an inverse proportion to their importance. So, the person whose phone goes off is the person who is not on call, not a doctor, not a lawyer, not a police officer, not a firefighter. They're getting a call from someone. It's not in the least important. It's never someone's dying somewhere and they need to leave. It's always something unimportant.
No.
It's Sunday. Hopefully your fellow Catholic friends know you're at Mass. Why are they calling you?
Yeah. It's the chime of the ring going off of your Facebook update,
Right. And if your friends don't know that you're at Mass on Sunday, if your non-Catholic friends don't know that you're at Mass on Sunday, that's another problem. But you should have certain designated no-go times. And if someone does call you, let them know. Say, hey, by the way, don't ever call me at 10 o'clock on Sundays. I from 9 to noon. I'm not going to be available. I think it's important. Right. Let people know. I mean, let's say they do call you, whatever. I think I'm probably of the school of thought, Father, that cell phones probably need to be turned off, if not on silent. There's absolutely zero reason. And again, we understand people are new to a chapel. They may be new to traditional Catholicism. This is all new for them. I mean, I don't know what it's like in a Novus Ordo church. I haven't been in a Novus Ordo, sect, temple for a long time, but I don't know what it's like, but I know if you're new, we're not talking about you. We're talking to people who've been attending the traditional Mass for years, and for some reason, they feel the need to bring their cell phone into Mass on with the ringer on. And there doesn't need to be an announcement. Father doesn't need to say, please turn your cell phones off for tonight's performance. There's no need for that. You're at Mass. You should be conscious of that.
Yeah, and chances are your traditional priest deals with flight attendants enough to be completely annoyed by all the requests of turning off your phone. So we don't need to make it here at the church either. So it's, but you almost feel like you wish you could have someone actually standing by the door with a basket for collection of cell phones, because it's just, nothing disrupts, and it never happens at like a point that's, I don't know, the procession out from behind, to start Mass. It always happens at like the elevation or something. It's the most solemn part of Mass whatsoever. So it's, just turn your phones off. That's, we have a sign here at St. Gertrude saying as much, standing in the middle of the foyer, just turn your phones off. The priest isn't bringing his phone out to the altar. You don't need to bring yours out to the altar either. And so just turn it off.
You're not that important. You're not that important.
Exactly.
Turn it off.
Exactly. Doctors and police officers, aside, and like you said, usually they're discreet enough that they put it on vibrate and will take the call outside the church, and so, or call them back or whatever. So it's just use common sense in that regard. But then getting back to the task at hand here, dress at church. First and foremost, it has to be modest. We are not. We are not part of the Novus Ordo sect. We are not part of Protestant sects, which sadly, actually, a lot of Protestant sects, do better than most, Catholics do in this regard. But we're not here just as like some other place that you're showing up to. This is church. This is where you come to God. First off, you should be modest in your life all the while. You don't want to be a temptation, but to others towards sin. But even more so at church. This is where you come to forget about yourself and to think of and remember God. And so, for modesty standards, for men, you have to wear slacks and to wear proper trousers to Mass, and wear a suit and dress modestly in the fact that you, as a gentleman would. And usually it's easier for men, because as long as they don't wear shorts, then you at least moving in the right direction modesty wise. Women, it's always more of a fight for modesty, but we have to think how am I going to be? I'm coming to the altar of the crucifixion of our Lord. Our Lady was at the altar of the crucifixion when it happened on that Good Friday. Then I should be as Mary-like as possible. I should be as modest as possible, always having that mindset of being modest. So, every church that's a traditional chapel that I know of has modesty standards. Dresses or skirts have to be below the knee not only when you're standing, but when you're sitting. The dress should become below your knee, and it should not have a long slit in it or anything like that. It shouldn't be form-fitting. You should have a shirt that is not see-through, and your shirt should have sleeves to it. And I'm not talking little cap sleeves that cover just the bit of shoulder blade, but actual sleeves, coming down at least to the elbow. And no low necklines or back lines. You get 2 inches from the base of your neck. These are the standards of modesty for women, and they're not things to just be like, well, it's kind of a roundabout area. No, be very strict with yourself in that regard. Have some dignity. Have some love for God in that respect, and the love for not only your own soul but for other people's soul. This is not this is not a show of yourself. This is mass. This should be your rule of modesty in that regard. And do note that if someone is dressed in a way that is immodest, I'm not talking a little bit past the line that we draw here, but but grossly immodest, plunging neckline that or something like that. It's our duty to actually refuse them communion. So, this is how serious it is. And for women, don't forget about head cover. Most chapels will have a basket of veils if you don't have one yourself or you forgot one that you can wear on your head, but or a nice hat or something in that regard. And for men, don't forget to take your hats off. That's what modesty is for dress. So, I think it's something that people hear, but they can never hear enough of. And also, I think people really need to say it's not just something Father's saying, and it's not just throwbacks to an antiquated time that we're not up with the times. No, this is something that goes beyond just what's custom, and goes to the point of what's modest, what is something that is going to not cause other people to be tempted to sin. And then that is really, really important when it comes to dress. Also, in regards to dress, we cover the rules for modesty. We also should cover the rules of properness with that. Now, this is something that is outside of what's modest. This is just what is becoming and what should be worn at every chapel. Men.
And Father, can I hit pause just for a second? Those of you who are listening to our stream live, we're going to be at the end of our live stream. We're only allowed 2 hours of live stream. So if you're listening to us live, you're going to get cut off here in a second. But don't worry, I'm going to go into overtime with Father, and I'm thinking it's probably going to be another 15 minutes. So just wait about 15 minutes. The show will wrap, drop into download form. You can download and then fast forward to the final 15 minutes and get caught up. So don't panic. It's going to cut off. But Father and I are going to continue our conversation, and you can listen to it in about 15 minutes. So sorry about that, Father. Please continue.
Oh, sorry. And so for proper dress, men, this is where we start to get into things that men would really tend to violate. Men should realize that they should show up to Mass, especially for a Sunday. It's not a situation where they're coming from work and they just happen to be able to get to a Mass devotion or something like that. But they should show up to Mass in a suit. So you should have dress slacks on. You should have a dress shirt on with a tie and a suit coat. There should not be any sports coats. There's, sports coats as in sports teams on your coat, like a starter jacket or whatever people make these days. Can you tell them? You shouldn't have. You should have a dress coat on, a suit coat on. You shouldn't have a coat with a big logo on it or a shirt with a logo on it or anything like that. It should be dress attire, shirt, tie, suit coat, and also with that is dress shoes and dress socks. No sneakers, no sandals. Don't wear white socks with your dress shoes. Don't wear your hooded sweatshirt over your shirt and tie. Don't, all of these things. It's, you should appear in, semi-formal attire in that regard. And that's, just remember that, sometimes seeing that before, people wearing white tube socks with dress shoes and dress slacks, and thinking to myself, I will buy you a pair of black socks if you can, if need be. It's, it's from head to toe, dress appropriately. And then the same goes for women, dress skirts and blouses and things. Don't wear, just because you think you can put a skirt on and a top that's modest, don't just wear any old T-shirt because it comes up to my neck and therefore it's good enough. No, don't. I don't want to see your favorite sports team on a T-shirt. I want to see you wearing the same type of dress attire that is appropriate for a woman as men would have to wear dress attire. And the same thing with the jackets. Don't just put on any kind of sports team jacket or jacket with a big logo on it or something like that. And then dress shoes, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed in regards to women. Put on dress shoes as well. You're dressing up, you might as well go all the way down to the feet. Put on dress shoes. Don't wear your sneakers. Don't wear flip-flops when it's warm out. That just because you're wearing a skirt and you can kind of get away without having, in that regard, women don't have to wear socks per se. Doesn't mean that just because you don't have to wear socks doesn't mean you don't have to wear shoes. You still need to wear actual shoes, not flip-flops, not sandals, anything like that. We, from head to toe, we dress up. It's our Sunday best. If we were to go to a wedding, we would dress for a wedding. And this is Mass. This is Christ himself coming upon the altar. And even more so, we have to dress up for our Lord. We would dress up for important people. If we were meeting, the President of the United States or a king or something, we wouldn't show up in a hoodie and faded jeans. We'd show up in a suit at least. And, we're meeting the King of Kings here at church. This is all very, very important in that regard. And I think that whole, and there's something to be said also about if you dress the part, then it will help bring your mind and your soul in line with that to be, truly one without any kind of worry or distraction at a Mass. If your exterior is conducive to what's actually happening, then it will help to draw your interior more focused in that way. And so we should be the whole package, focused on Mass from head to toe, in and out. So.
Now, Father, when you say Sunday best, is there such a thing as a weekday second best? I'm on my way to Mass. I'm sorry. I'm trying to go to work. Maybe I dress differently at work. Wearing a suit at work wouldn't work. So Sunday best, is there a weekday second best?
Well, yeah, and I think it has to be, that recognition. If you're on your way to work or on your way home from work and, you're coming to a Mass out of devotion for a weekday Mass, and say you're a construction worker and you get off the job site and you're heading home and you look at your watch and you realize, oh, great, there's Mass and, I'm 5 minutes from the church and there's Mass in 15 minutes. I'll stop by before I go home to go to Mass. Then come as you are, as long as you have pants. Don't come in shorts. But if you, it's and ladies, maybe carry a skirt. Well, you should wear a skirt all the time, really. But just if it always be kind of realizing what you have to have. If you're a lady, have a a veil in your car or something all the time. But just ready for it. But if you're coming in your work clothes because you have to, you're the only way you can do it, then that's fine. Because you're coming purely out of devotion to our Lord on an extra day, and you have to fit it into your busy life schedule, and God knows that. Now, if you're just sitting at home twiddling your thumbs all day, not twiddling your thumbs, but if you're just at home and ready access to church type clothes, then you should put on church clothes. If you can come to a mass and you have easy access to church clothes, then do that. But if you just happen to be, like I said, being able to come and it's in the middle of doing something and you don't have on, say you have on that you're a woman, you have your skirt on, but you're wearing a sweatshirt with the skirt. That's fine. You were out shopping and you had extra time to be able to make it to mass. That's fine. Those things are absolutely fine, because you're coming out of devotion to God, and it's something that you have fit into your busy life schedule. So.
Well, we've had a long conversation today. I think I told you before the show that we had quite a bit to handle ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the things that we had talked about before the show was people asking about confession because of Mass. And so we made the decision not to talk about confession today because we thought it was going to be quite a lot to get through. And as it turns out, we were right. Not only was it 2 hours, but we went over. So just to do some can you address confession in the context of Mass? What should be the expectation? We're going to do a show on confession later in the season, so we don't need to cover that ground now. But just in terms of your obligation and going to confession, what should we be mindful of?
All right. Well, the obligation to go to confession is there if you are, if you have fallen into mortal sin, then you want to go, then you should get to confession. Certainly, most chapels, if the priest is around during the week, he'll have confessions on Fridays and Saturdays, and or whatever other schedule he has arranged for his chapel or something along those lines. Then try to get to confession on those days. If you can't, that's fine. Usually confession is offered before Mass on a Sunday. But you should, if you need to go to confession on a Sunday, then get yourself there in enough time. Get there early. Be one of the first ones to the confession line, because if the priest is by himself and he has to cut off confessions to get ready for Mass, he doesn't like telling people that are in line waiting to receive confession that they can't come because he has to get ready for Mass, but he has an obligation to keep Mass on schedule. So show up early, and that way you'll make sure that you got your confession heard. And if you're at a place that has multiple priests, like for instance here at St. Gertrude's, and maybe the priest doesn't have to say that Mass that's coming up, and he will stay in the confessional line until all the confessions are heard. This doesn't mean you shouldn't show up early just because, Father's going to be in the confessional a little later anyways. No, I mean, while it's true if you get stuck in that situation, you can still continue to wait in line and go to confession while Mass has begun, and you're not doing anything wrong or impious in that regard. It is certainly much better to be able to get to confession before Mass begins, and then that way you can attend without any kind of splitting of thoughts or distractions at all, the entirety of the Mass. So, just in general, I think showing up to confession early is good. And if, the priest is not in the confessional yet, and, he's running, say confession starts at 7:10 and he sees that people are there, then he'll make sure he gets in there as soon as possible. Whereas, there's nothing more from a priest standpoint, there's nothing more disheartening than, you get into the confessional, say confession started 45 minutes before Mass started, and you get in the confessional and nobody comes, and then in the last 20 minutes, all of a sudden there's a huge line at the confessional, and you have to start Mass up, and you have to cut off the line. And all you can think to yourself is, well, if people showed up during that 20 minutes before or 25 minutes before they started coming into the confessional, then I could have probably got most, if not everybody, heard in that time. And so, if you need to go to confession, then make it a point to get there nice and early. That way you can go to confession, maybe have time to even say your penance before the Mass starts, and then be ready to just solely focus on Mass itself. So I think that's as much as I really want to get into confessional. Like you said, there's a whole loaded topic of confession, which we can deal with at another time. Then there was one thing, if I can go back, Stephen, that I did want to touch on briefly.
Absolutely.
We talked about the beginning of Mass, preparation for Mass. We talked about attending Mass. We talked about Holy Communion. The one thing we didn't get to touch on was after Mass, making Thanksgiving after Mass. Just as important as, if not even, maybe even more important than making a preparation for Mass. It's, really important to make a Thanksgiving for Mass. I mean, it's truly a wonderful gift from God. I mean, you're receiving God Himself, and just like you wouldn't get a present from somebody and not say thank you to them, at the same time you would want to be thankful to God, and so that time after Mass, not that, okay, priest walks around the corner of the altar, I'm going to, jump up and run to the parish hall so I can grab be the first one in line for coffee and donuts, or, that way I can jump in the car, and that way I can get home and get my, my nacho tray ready in time for the game to this afternoon or something like that. No, you come to Mass, be thankful that you come to Mass, and have that time afterwards to thank Christ for offering Himself as that sacrifice and being able to receive Him. There's St. Alphonsus Liguori said of making a thanksgiving after Mass. He said, there is no prayer more agreeable to God or more profitable to the soul than that which is made during Thanksgiving after Holy Communion. And so it's, if there's ever a time in your life that you pray, it should be after you receive Holy Communion. And you should take that time when Mass is finished to, there's plenty of prayers in your Missal of Thanksgiving prayers for after Mass. Many of them have indulgences to them. There's, your soul is purer than at any other time. You still might even have Christ, corporally dwelling within you, because, as the Catechism tells us, that it's usually at least 15 minutes that our Lord is still physically present within you after communion. And then certainly spiritually present there with you, with all those sacramental graces that go along with it. That, we should take the time to make, a good Thanksgiving. It's, and definitely not running out as soon as the Mass is done. The movement of people towards the door while the closing hymn is still being sung. Absolutely not. Just take the time. You've come to Mass. You've invested your time to be here at Mass. Take a few extra minutes when Mass is finished and benefit, reap those rewards from our Lord, and also just give thanks to Him for that wonderful gift that He's given you. I mean, take a second to think about that. You've received God Himself, the Creator of you and your own self and all of the universe around you. You've received Him, on your own tongue. You've seen the greatest miracle of all of heaven coming down and touching earth. Take a few minutes to reflect upon that and be prayerful about it and give thanks for it after Mass. So, Thanksgiving after Mass is one of the most important things outside of the Mass itself. stress, that I wish more people would take advantage of that time to be of quiet prayer and with our Lord after Holy Communion.
The last thing I wanted to add, Father, I mentioned this on the blog at True Restoration, that I was edified to see here at my parish that people are taking notes on the sermon. I don't mean like lecture notes at a university, but I saw a man with a notebook, and when Father would say a phrase, he would jot that down, and then he'd put the notebook back down. I saw a couple people recording digitally the sermons. Obviously, there's no obligation to do that, but I have to imagine you wouldn't mind if people did that.
Well, no, of course not, because then more than ever, you're realizing that people are taking something that they plan on reflecting on afterwards. It's always very edifying to me to hear, because at both St. Gertrude's and at St. Hugh in Milwaukee, we record the sermons and then we make them available on the internet, either at St. Gertrude's on our own website or at St. Hugh via, the traditional Catholic Sermons website. We always take the care to record them, and I'm always edified to hear that someone will go back and listen to the sermon again a second time and get something new out of it. And it's, I think that's, important. And if that means that you jot something, priest says a quote or says, makes a point that you think is really important in your own life, and you feel it important enough to jot down because you want to revisit it later, then that's what we want in our sermons. Not that everybody comes with notebook in hand, but we want people to take the message away from the sermon and apply it to their own life. No priest cares if you remember who preached the sermon. What we do care about is that the message that comes out of the sermon is received and is digested and put into practice. That's what we want. That's what the work into putting a sermon together is for, is that people will apply it to their lives and hopefully grow in grace a little bit because of those thoughts.
Thanks so much for your time. It was a long show today, wasn't it?
It was a long show today. Hopefully everybody stuck with us all the way through.
But we had a lot to cover. But if you have any questions for us, you can always, or for Father, you can email us at pastoralia@truerestoration.org, and those emails will go right to Father. And whether you have questions about previous shows that we've done, questions about today's show, or, and here's where you get to participate, this is active participation, you can send us a question that you'd like us to tackle on Pastoralia. And just remember, our sister show, Clerical Conversations, tackles issues that take more than 30 minutes to explain. We are the JV show, Junior Varsity. We take questions under 30 minutes. So think about that. And that's fine. Even if you send that to us, we'll send that on to Clerical Conversations and they'll deal with it. But feel free, make sure. And if you have any personal stuff to speak, Father will read your email. It won't be, something that is, forwarded to a bunch of people. So if you have a personal issue that you need to share with Father, send it to Pastoralia, and then Father may give you his personal email address to correspond with him on that matter. So don't feel like you have to tell your whole story. Just say, I have a personal issue I'd like to discuss with Father. Can you put me in contact with him? And we can do that.
All right. Thank you very much, Stephen.
All right, Father, we'll see you soon. We at the Restoration Radio Network would ask that if you find this show to be informative, helpful, or in any way beneficial to you and to your faith, you would please consider making whatever donation is possible to our apostolate, no matter how small it may be. To those of you who have donated, a heartfelt thank you for your kindness and generosity. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to reproduce our work on your channel in some format, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to leave us a message on our Twitter handle @TrueRestoration or via email at mail@truerestoration.org. For the Restoration, I am Stephen Heiner. May God bless you.
This program was brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.